Hi all. So in this section, as I said from the previous section, we're going to talk about and focus on just Firebase authentication. Okay. So we'll just start off with a little bit of an overview, kind of talk about what it is, and then we look at kind of some code snippets and kind of the setup that you need to go through in terms of setting up a Firebase project and how we would actually then integrate it into an app. Okay. So to begin with, most apps need to know the identity of a user. Knowing a user's identity allows an app to securely save user data in the cloud and provide the same personalized experience across all of the user's devices. Okay, Firebase Authentication provides backend services, easy-to-use SDKs, and ready-made UI libraries to authenticate users to your app. It supports authentication using passwords, phone numbers, and popular federated identity providers, which we'll talk about now in a minute. So if you can just kind of picture this scenario, right? So this is a type of screen that's present in almost all apps these days. Okay, so you log on. You can connect with Facebook there, connect with Twitter, log in with your Google, basic email. You can, if you want, you can set up then a separate username, password if you want. If you're not too hot about sharing your kind of your Google credentials or your Facebook credentials. You might have to go, if you've forgotten your password, you might go off and get that password again. Just consider how long it would take you to develop all that from scratch. Okay. And that's where Firebase comes in here and Firebase authentication. Okay, so like that would be a mountain of work to do, to be honest. And again, I've said this before, I'll say it again, no point in reinventing the wheel when you don't have to. Okay, so what we can do with Firebase authentication is that it integrates easily with popular identity providers like Google, Facebook, Twitter, and there's more as well there as well. You can actually have a kind of a GitHub feature as well that you want to sign in, log in with GitHub. Okay, so some of the capabilities. Right, you can sign in users to your Firebase app either by using the Firebase UI, again we'll look at that later on, it's a very nice library, as a complete drop-in auth solution, or by using the Firebase Authentication SDK. So we'll focus on that to begin with, okay, to manually integrate one or several sign-in methods into your app. So again, you can, if like the slides there we looked at, you can have more than one sign-in method if you want to. It takes a little bit more work, but you can do that. The Firebase Authentication SDK provides methods to create and manage users that use their email addresses and passwords to sign in, and the Firebase Authentication also handles sending password reset emails and you can kind of send verification links as well if you need to. Okay. Now, a few points to note there. You will need to register your app with the individual service provider. So if it's like, obviously if this with Firebase is all Google provided, with your Google sign in, your basic email password sign is a lot more straightforward. If you want to sign in with Facebook, you want to sign in with Twitter, any of those, you'll have to register your app with those as well. So there's a little bit more work you have to do on that end. So what I'm hoping to do is we'll initially focus on just an email password, and then we'll bring in Google sign in because it's probably the most straightforward. Especially on Android, probably one of the most common and popular ones. Okay, saying that, there's minimal client-side handling, right, and it integrates seamlessly with Firebase, and you do have a ready-made forgot password flow with customizable email templates. So if you need to change the kind of the standard template that's sent out, you can do that on your Firebase console. Okay. So what I want to talk or take you through then is how do we set up Firebase authentication in a particular app. Now we will basically do the same in Donation, but in terms of just a general app, the steps you go through to bring in Firebase authentication into your app. Okay, so the first thing you do is you go and create your Firebase project. Now you can, if you want, if you have Android Studio open and then straight away you want to just dive straight into integrating Firebase, you can do it that way, and it will take you off and it'll help you set up your project and all the rest of it. But personally I find it's a little bit more straightforward and a little bit easier, I guess, to do it this way first, so that you would separately to Android, outside of Android Studio, you would create your Firebase project. So you would be presented with this screen, or so you log on to your firebase.console.com, just to show you up there. So we log in here, firebase.google.com, sorry. And then go to your console. Okay, or like, so I suppose you sign in first, and then you'll be signing in with your Gmail account, your Google account, and then you go to your console. Okay, and what you get is something like this. Now look, here's, as I said, here's stuff I have, projects I would have been working on or previous, and here's the actual one we'll be working on in with Donation. So I have set up a project already, but this is the screen you will be presented with. If you don't have any projects already set up, you'll just be presented with the add project. So you'll select the add project, and you'll be asked for a name. So you don't have to give it this name. You can give it a name whatever you want. This is your console. This is your project, and we will talk about some files that are specific to your project that you would need to download or need to make available to someone else if they were going to use your project as well. But as I said, we'll focus on that later on. So this is, you'll be presented with just the project name. It's kind of fairly standard stuff, just setting it up, right? Once it's set up, this is what you're presented with. So here we have, this is our project, donation project. It's on that Spark plan. We'll talk about those plans now in a minute. You can on your console add in your particular app, whether it's iOS, Android, or web. This way, we will do it through Android Studio because we're going to be working with our project, our donation application. But if you look over here, we have our authentication. There's our database, there's our storage, there's hosting, there's the machine learning stuff. You can actually have your own functions, whatever you want. Look, here's our analytics down here. So there's a huge amount of features and functionality that you get automatically when you create your project. So what we're focusing on at the moment is the authentication. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at. So again, we're still on our console. We haven't gone near our app yet. We haven't gone near Android Studio yet. We're just setting up our project. Okay, so just to suppose as an aside, if nothing else, I guess by default you get that Spark plan. Okay, so it's free, has certain quotas in terms of using the database, your storage functions, all the rest of it. But for testing purposes, you won't need to go beyond that. It's if you need to do more than that, you have the options for other plans there. Okay, so just making you aware of that. So we're kind of the Spark plan is the basic one there. So as I said, we're working with authentication. So you'll hit the authentication tab. You'll see at the moment we've no users because we actually have nothing set up. If you want to, you can actually add users. You could set up users manually there. You can add in users if you want. So what we're focusing on is the sign-in method. Okay, so we want to enable just to begin with our email password. We will come back here and we will enable Google, okay, and our Google sign. But you can see there, look, you have your Facebook, you have Twitter, look, GitHub and Yahoo, even Microsoft there as well. So a lot of different providers you can allow the user to sign into your app with. Okay, that's just the next screen you'll be presented with. I haven't enabled the email link, but you can if you want. Just for your assignment, maybe it could be worth just another nice little feature to have in. Just make sure that you do enable the email password option. That's the type of provider you want to sign in the user with. Okay, so that's what you end up with. We're still on our sign in method tab. Just one enabled, our email and password. So that's our console set up. So it's ready to deal with users been authenticated against that particular project with an email and a password. You then go back to your Android Studio and into your app, and you go to your tools and you hit the Firebase option. Okay, so there's under tools and there's our Firebase. So what you get with that is this tab will open up, has all the different things you can set up. Look, there's our analytics, cloud messaging. We will be coming back to real-time database and storage. But for the moment, I'm just highlighting there because what we're dealing with is authentication. So you'll hit your authentication tab. I'll give you like so. So we just want email and password authentication because that's what we want to just set it up with. Okay. You're then presented with the following. So it's kind of like it drills down into these this extra information that you're required. So the first things you'll do, and this will be done kind of automatically for us, and we will have what we need installed for us automatically, is we will connect to our Firebase console and a particular project that we want to connect to, and then we will add Firebase authentication to your app. So that will install the dependencies that we need and that Google services JSON file. Okay, but we'll come back to that later on. So once that's done, when you connect to Firebase, you are presented with your list of projects that you have previously set up. Now, again, if you were doing this directly in Android Studio, you'd have to go off and create the project and then kind of be brought back here. So that's why I find it's a little bit easier to set up the project first, so that you're just presented with the list of your projects and off you go. So here I am selecting my HDIP-donation. For you, it'll be whatever you've called it. So again, it doesn't have to be this, but again, look, it's your project. You can call it what you want. Okay, you'll hit your connect to Firebase, and that'll go off and that it'll set it up for you automatically. You then, when you go to add Firebase authentication, you get your dependencies added in. So you can see here's at the project level, right? And then we have at the app level. Okay, the numbers may differ a little bit. Okay, but whatever your current setup is, that's the one it's going to pick. Okay, so again, I kind of recommend trying to have your kind of your dependencies and Android Studio as up to date as possible. Okay, just accept the changes on those. You can see it there. Just say yeah, that's good to go, and it'll install everything we need. Okay, so then what you do is you introduce your authentication flow. So this is where the coding actually starts. Now, you could go off and do loads of research and looking up Stack Overflow and all the rest of it, but I would definitely recommend this particular link here. Okay, this has everything you need to install and set up and see examples of any of the features that you want to use in Firebase. So this is the reference I'll be using for our authentication, our database, our storage, and anything else that we might decide to have a look at later on. Okay, so but for the moment, all the any examples that we look at in our lab, and we'll see some of that in the walkthrough, I've gotten from this reference here. Okay, so highly recommend having a look at this. It's full project, it's up on GitHub project, so you can download it. You can even run it off the bat. You might have to just do a little bit of configuration, but you can set it up as is, and you can see it working yourself in demo mode, and then you can kind of refactor that and use what you need. And that's what I've done in the labs. That I've taken a lot of this and used it in the labs. Okay, so again, definitely worth checking out. To look at some of the code then, this is from the official developer docs, just some code snippets here. We will be seeing this again in the lab, and we've focused on it in a little bit more detail in the labs, but just to kind of just give you a quick first look at the type of code that we will be dealing with when implementing our authentication in our excuse me, in our donation app. So the first few slides here are dealing with creating an account, and the code is quite similar between whether it's creating or signing in. You still need the same instances, you still need the same references. Okay, so just to kind of walk through this here a little bit. To create a new user account with a password, complete the following steps in your app sign-in activity. So first of all, in your sign-up activities on create method, so we will have a login, we will add a new login activity, and inside that on create, we will see something like this. So you'll inside that on create get the shared instance of the Firebase Auth object. Now, when we added Firebase to our project, we got these dependencies, which means we have access to these particular the library. And when it's imported automatically, so we can use these as is. Okay, so we initialize our Firebase Auth. So there we're going to use this authentication object throughout the project. Okay, and that's where we can get at then what the current user is, then it's the user's email, and a lot of other properties that we might need to look at later on. So that's the first thing we do. So we have we have our instance. Okay. We then initialize it and look for the current user. So when initializing our activity, check to see if the user is currently signed in. So this is quite a nice feature as well, that unless the user, and we'll set this up the same way in our donation app, if the user is already signed in, we will just take them straight through and we will bypass the login screen. And if you think about it, that's what you would expect as a user. If you don't sign out, you expect to be kept signed in, and that's what we will do as well. So this is something else we will have. So we will look for the current user. So there we are, accessing the current user property of our auth, our Firebase Auth instance, right? This is taken from kind of the sample. So if you look it up there, we have our email password activity. That's kind of taken from the those resources, that link I gave you as well. In here, all this is doing is updating or is accessing the login layout to just give back some details. What we will be doing is a little bit more and taking the user off to the current home screen, okay? So this is basically just using the current user, whether it is instantiated, has a value or not. Okay, so when you look at the code in detail, and we will look at some of that in the code walkthrough, depending on whether the current user is actually instantiated or not, the layout changes. Okay, so another point there, point 3, when a new user signs up using your app sign-in form, complete any new account validation steps that your app requires, such as verifying that the new account's password is correctly typed and meets your complexity requirements. And now again, from the example that I've downloaded and we're using, all that's done for us already. Okay, so it's quite nice. It's some great starter code, to be honest. Okay. Next thing we do is, and we mentioned this back in some of the introductory stuff, there's these built-in methods that we can call automatically to do a lot of the setup work for us. So to create a new account, we pass in the new user's email and address, email and password that we would have gotten from the login screen, and pass it to this, just highlighted there for you know, this create user with email and password. So again, pretty self-explanatory, does exactly what it says. We're passing in here, we are passing in an email and a password, and that goes off and checks to see, this will go back to your Firebase console, will check to see if the user exists already, and throw back some other errors. So that's kind of, we have our is successful or otherwise, right? And if the task is successful, so again, that's kind of, it returns back. So it goes off, creates, does it all for us, go off, creates the user with the email and the password. That will come up on a console, which we'll see in the examples. We then update our user, or assign a user property, excuse me, with that auth.current user again, and then pass it off to our update UI. Otherwise, if something went wrong, if the sign-in fails, we can just display some kind of message back to the user. Here, it's just a simple toast, right? And it updates the UI again. For yourselves, it might be something different. You might take them back to the login screen, might take them off somewhere else, maybe. That if depending on what messages came back, if it was the user wasn't created correctly or whatever, you can kind of populate it there. Okay, we will see this again in our lab. Okay, if the new account, just to finish off the little bit of notes there, if the new account was created, the user is also signed in, which is like what would be expected, right? In the callback, you can use the get current user method to get the user's account data. So we will actually leverage this later on. So this is where you can get at emails, you can get at any other information that you might have wanted to set up. Okay. So to then look at signing in a user, so that's the kind of the flow for creating a user. Not too much different to signing in a user. So we're assuming here the user has already created, or sorry, has already registered. So we've created the user on our console or Firebase console. The user has signed out, is now coming back in and signing back into your application. So again, we still need a Firebase Auth instance, which we're going to store in our auth. So again, this will be in the on create again in our sign in activity. So this will be essentially the same on the login screen, and we can see in our examples we actually use the login screen for both signing in and creating a new user. Okay. We then, same as before, check to see if the user is currently signed in. So that's identical to the last one. So there we are, grabbing the current user, checking to see what it is, and then depending on whether it's instantiated or not, is looked after inside that update UI function. Okay. And then we use, whereas previously we had our create, right? We now have our sign in with email and password, and it's basically exactly the same thing. Have your the callback, there it is there. If everything works okay, we, in this little code snippet here, we're updating the UI with that authenticated user, right? We can and will do something a little bit different in our own example. Otherwise, if they didn't sign in correctly, could have been bad password, whatever, bad email, our authentication fail comes back, and then we update the UI with null property. In this particular example, you might decide to do something a little bit different in your assignment. I'm going to try and follow the examples as closely as I can to avoid any confusion. And I think it works pretty nice. Okay, so if the sign in succeeded, you can use the returned Firebase user to proceed. So that's what we would be doing then. At this point, our user signed in. We have it stored in our a user object inside our auth, and we can actually reference auth.currentUser, and that's what we will then use in our donation app to build in that multi-user support. Okay, so there'll be slight changes to the node server, which I'll talk about in later sections, and that will allow us then to store donations with a particular user, so that we can leverage that whole sign in, that authentication flow, to then integrate into our node server. Okay, other than that, let me see, I think there's not much else there. Let me see, hang on, sorry. Yeah, so we look at what to do with the authenticate user in the code walkthrough and the lab. So as I was just previously mentioned there, we will use that current user's email as the unique identifier to attach to a donation when we make a donation, so that when we go to retrieve the donations, we can retrieve all donations belonging to ddroneitwith.ie or whoever. Okay, and that kind of wraps up that kind of little brief overview of Firebase authentication. I think when we actually sit down and you go through it in the lab and you can see the flow itself and see the code in its entirety, things will be a lot more clear. Okay, so other than that, there's our 3 references again. Okay, so there's your console. Okay, we have the Firebase reference, and again, to highlight it again, the official kind of Firebase repo for all examples of all the kind of features that exist within Firebase, obviously covering the ones we'll be using, which is authentication, our database, and our storage. Okay, so other than that, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.